So today I have the pleasure of chatting with Jacob. Jacob is the founder and CEO of Creme Digital, a leading software development agency in the no-code space. So welcome to the podcast, Jacob.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
So I'd love to kick things off by going right back to the start. You know, where did your journey begin with Bubble and building an agency? Where did that all begin?
Yeah, so, all through kind of my early years, through high school, a little bit through middle school, I've been pretty fond of, starting companies and building. I built my first app when I was in grade six. I built like an app that would like notify my parents when I got to school on time. And so I think that kind of sparked this like love for entrepreneurship and business. And in grade 12, I was running. Yeah, but it was called Creme Media, which is basically what we ended up rebranding into what it is now, Creme Digital. But at the time, we were just like a marketing media company and helping a lot of like realtors and like local businesses with media and advertising. But when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of businesses that needed to go digital, and so we saw a pretty interesting opportunity to help those businesses. A lot of them, not having as much money to necessarily build a full on like full stack application, but having, 10, 20 grand to kind of build a digital solution for their business. And so we ended up helping a lot of businesses build on Bubble, which was kind of the no code tool that I was familiar with and like to play around in. So that was kind of how it all started. And then it kind of like grew from there and blossomed into like that being the only thing we do. So yeah.
That's awesome. Like, how did you stumble across Bubble? Like, because I feel like you were doing it 3 or 4 years ago, right? Like when it was a
Yeah.
little bit more niche. Like I feel like now it's a lot more mainstream. But how did you come across Bubble?
Yeah, no, I've been building on it for probably the past like 5, 6 years at this point. I came in through, I think a couple friends probably showed me it, and I just probably saw it on YouTube or something like that. Even in the early days, people were still kind of talking about it. And then I like kind of started tinkering on it just to see what it was all about, and I quickly like really enjoyed building on it and like built a knack for doing so. And so like my love for building with it for myself like turned into like okay, I can now see like building for other people as well. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like I heard on Brett's podcast, you're on that recently. That yeah, you like built an app for your school in like a week or two.
yeah,
Like that's pretty
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. We built. Always saw kids like buying and selling things on Snapchat on stories and stuff like that, like phones and shoes and stuff like that. So I thought maybe there was an opportunity to build like an actual platform just for like you would go through the onboarding experience and you'd select what school you were in, and then it would just put you in like basically an equivalent of like a Facebook group just for your school of buying and selling things. So yeah, I built that in Bubble and probably took like a week or so. And it was pretty fun, just a kind of an experiment. And then I ended up like my school had like a meme kind of page that like a lot of kids followed from the school, and so I like reached out to them to do like a I guess a sponsorship at the time. They didn't charge me for it because they knew I was a student, and I pretty much got like half the school on it from that, so it was cool.
That's cool. You're like the Mark Zuckerberg of your school. Like that's
Yeah,
that's actually pretty cool.
yeah,
And then so okay, so I guess you built that app for your
mm,
school and you've been
yeah.
bubbling for 5 to 6 years. Like how did you like learn Bubble initially? Did you like just like learn on YouTube, or were you like going and like learning on courses, or did you just like play around and figure it out?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of kind of all three. Originally, when I was building the first thing, I got some help from somebody who knew it a bit better, and so I think watching them build on it and starting to like kind of re-engineer what they were doing, and like figure out okay, this works because of that, and I was able to like just over time by building and like googling when I need to fill in some of the gaps. But there's kind of a point where you kind of just like like it kind of snaps for you and you kind of just get it, and I'm sure that's like with a lot of things, but there was that moment for me where like I kind of was like, okay, well now I know how to build in it, and like it's nothing. It's unlike coding where you like you can't really forget it because it's like I don't even know. It's concrete into my brain at this point. because I'm not like remembering how to code. Like there is no code. It's just like I remember how to think through it, and I remember and I know how to like obviously utilize Bubble as a tool to execute on that. And so it's pretty hard to forget like once you learn it.
I see. Okay. Because are you like still doing much of the work? Because I heard on Brett's podcast like you were doing like 100, 150K a month.
Yeah.
And like I imagine like you've probably got a fair few developers doing a lot of the work now. Like are you still doing a lot of the work in the weeds doing bubble development, or are you kind of doing like bigger picture, operating the business, that kind of thing now?
Yeah. So even from like the start, I've never actually built a project for a client. I've only built for myself, and I've maybe tinkered in some projects for clients. But I am very far removed from besides even from development, even far removed from like design and project management as a whole. Um, just have like early on like understood obviously delegation and like not being stuck into it, something especially as like extreme and like energy intensive as development, like you just can't like take on a project without spending your whole day on it. So that was like pretty clear from the start. And I've never actually developed for us, but yeah, I have a great team in place of developers and designers and project managers, and operations people that kind of take that. So
So yeah, doing a lot of the operational, just like the business and kind of delegating. That's
yeah.
pretty amazing that you like learnt that so young, because you would have been like what 18, 17 at the time when you
Yeah,
started.
yeah, like 17, yeah.
So I guess now fast forward, that was like you started it when you're 17 and you've kind of built it through COVID, and then now you're doing, I heard like 100, 150K a month. Like what type of clients are you working with now?
Yeah, so we're primarily seeing a really interesting rise in like SMB mid-market enterprise clients. Um, I think that the startup MVP route is one that is interesting, and there is some use case to it, but it's not one that we're particularly focused on at this point, just because I think there's a much bigger opportunity at some of these like really big enterprises to help them with internal processes and internal tools. I mean, you'd be surprised if you like go into one of these like, 100 million, $200 million companies and see like what actually runs their company. It's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of like really crummy tools that are like kind of clumped together. And so that's kind of the opportunity that I see of like, okay, this is how no code goes from like building like, scrappy MVPs to like helping global companies build internal tools and automations. And so that's what we're really focused on. If, pretty much like pretty wide vertically. But we're really working with some companies that are like non-tech focused, right? Like companies that are like in real estate or media or financial services, like things that their focus isn't building software. It's kind of a secondary of just like running the business. And so we come in and help with a lot of that stuff.
Okay, so you're building like internal tools like CRMs or like
Yeah.
invoicing platforms or those kind of things. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And just the odd, like, so, like, there's so many of those companies have like that odd spreadsheet that just like starts, building over time and like before you know it, like runs like half the company. Not actually, but like, they're a pain to deal with, and like obviously not the most scalable solution and ran into a lot of human error. And so even just like replacing those like one-off spreadsheets and then like, looking for other areas of the business to improve.
That's awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like there's been a massive kind of trend towards internal tools. Like previously, like 5, 6 years ago, it was too expensive to go and build like a custom stack platform to compete with like Salesforce. But
Yeah.
yeah, like a lot of people are like getting sick of like, oh, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a, custom Salesforce platform or,
Yeah.
Oracle or all these big giants. And they kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. So that's actually like really cool to hear. Like you're seeing that massive trend because you're right in the weeds of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a definitely a compression happening in software as a whole. One, I think just with the current trajectory of the economy and like businesses being a lot more focused on profit over revenue, companies are really like trying to look at their software bills and be like, why am I paying $500,000 to Salesforce? Like, I don't really understand. And that Salesforce is like the easy example, but there's just so many of these like super niche vertical softwares and SaaS that are charging upwards of like six figures, maybe even seven figures a year. Um, and you don't even own it at the end of the day. You're using software that like probably does like 80% of the things that you want to do. It's not like custom to you, and you don't own it, and you don't really have much control over like security and privacy and all that stuff. So it's kind of like at this point like a no-brainer now that you have like tools out there, and you're not tied to like traditional development to build, and super expensive and slow, as you said. It's kind of a no-brainer to like just build your own tool. You'll save a lot of money in the long run, and then you'll ultimately like own the IP of it, right? So it's actually an asset instead of like a liability.
That's actually a good way of thinking about it. It's an asset instead of a liability. I actually like that. I think I'm going to use that one and steal that from you. Um, that's I wanted to ask as well, because I guess some of the listeners may not be familiar with the whole like no code space or the bubble space. So like how would you explain it to like someone who's never heard of it and they're used to only dealing with like traditional stack?
Yeah, so low code, I mean, this is the analogy that I like to use. If you think about a desktop computer, like, one of those boxes that you probably have, um, there's a lot of pieces inside of it. There's a graphics card, there's memory, there's RAM, etc. Um, when you are usually building software, all those kind of components that like make up the full machine, you're usually having to build those individual components from scratch. Like every time you want to build a new feed, every time you want to pull data from somewhere, every time you want to pull an integration from a third party service, you're usually having to build all that stuff from scratch, right? But no code is like kind of like the building blocks. Like, and the analogy I'll use is like it's kind of like the processor and the RAM, and it's all these things that make up the computer. You kind of have that like base to start off with, as far as like some of those like building blocks. Then you're able to put them together to kind of create something a lot more meaningful. So a lot of the times, like people think that no code isn't like there's limitations to it, as far as like what you can build. And to some extent, like if you are looking to build an application that's scaling to like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of users, I think that there probably is some truth into that. But nine times out of ten, for these companies that serve hundreds of thousands of people, or even better for internal tools, the limitations of actually what you can build, are the very little, if any, because again, you're just taking building blocks that already exist, and you're just able to do it a lot cheaper and a lot faster. So, and then if there is like room where you need to do custom stuff, you still have that option, but like you don't need to like go from scratch for everything.
Mm, that's a very cool analogy. I do like that computer analogy.
Yeah.
That's great. And like I guess so you said like one of the two advantages is time and money. Like it's cheaper and it's faster. How much quicker are you seeing you guys are able to build? Like if say an enterprise client came to you and was like, "Hey, we want to build this," and you gave them an estimate. Like how much of a difference is that compared to like traditional stack in terms of like months, I guess?
Yeah. So we, as a test, like to kind of speak on this, we at Airbnb, everybody knows Airbnb, and it's a popular thing to kind of compare about, as far as like in the no code world. And so a lot of people are like, we can rebuild Airbnb in like X amount of time with no code. And I was like, let's see like actually how fast we can do it. Um, and we took it like one step further. We also like redesigned and like thought about how to actually improve the product while doing it. So we came up with things like team travel or like group travel, where you could book a trip with your friends, and all like choose the place together and split the money and all that. We came up with like how to like pull the weather for when you were going to that place. That's like something people don't think about. Like, I believe you're in Australia. Um, the weather's flipped right now, but like people don't know
Yeah.
that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
summer for you, it's winter for us. If I were to be going to Australia, I probably wouldn't think that. So there's elements like that that we like wanted to work on improving, and yeah. Long story short, I mean, to build Airbnb, to build to the extent of the platform, I think if you were to do that in like a React or some kind of traditional environment, I think to do it to the level that they've done it, you're probably looking at like 6 to 12 months, depending on the team. And you're looking at, obviously, I mean, there's different ways to do it. If you hire an agency, you're probably looking at like 6 to 7 figures, so like 100, easily like 100, 200 grand, if not a lot more. If you hire a team, you could be looking at more depending on payroll and all that stuff. But in like for no code though, we were able to probably rebuild it and design it in around, I would say, 2 to 4 weeks with some testing. So I would say like obviously dramatically faster and some iteration in that as well. Um, and cost wise, you're looking at like, a fraction, maybe like, obviously for us, like it didn't really cost us anything, but if you were to go build it, you're probably looking at like 30 to 50 grand, something like that.
Wow, that's yeah, it's so crazy. Like, yeah, I think like the no code space is so like revolutionary. Like even just hearing about that
Yeah.
now, like 2 to 4 weeks compared to 6 to 12 months is just like a massive difference and is very game changing. Like I know the last like 4 or 5 years has been like very much like I feel like blockchain and AI have been like the big kind of like talking points in tech, but I feel like no code is like very much like a little bit of an underrated space of how like revolutionary it's been. Um, just for like startups and for internal tools and enterprises, like you said, like I just see it as like such a crazy revolutionary thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Especially like I don't know if you like learned to code at in high school or anything, but I never learned to code. And like when I started using like Bubble, I was like, whoa, I can like solve problems that I previously couldn't solve. Like, did you have a technical background or?
I dabbled in coding. I wouldn't say I was like incredible at it. I never really like enjoyed it, so I didn't like. But I dabbled in like Python and Java and HTML and CSS and stuff like that. And I took some courses throughout high school. But for me, I'm like pretty visual, um, and so I really enjoyed the experience of like being able to kind of like it sounds weird, but you're kind of able to visualize like what you're doing when you're using like these low code tools. So I really like enjoyed that element, and I just found that like the problem solving like side, which I think you've probably experienced too, like it's a lot more enjoyable to like solve those problems in that environment. So
Yeah, definitely. I've found that it's pretty cool experience being able to solve a problem in 2-3 weeks, which is pretty cool.
yeah.
So how are you guys finding clients? Like, do you have like cold email campaigns and LinkedIn campaigns, or are you just like networking, or have you kind of built up like a reputation now where you're not really having to do much outreach? Like, yeah, how are you guys getting
Yeah.
clients?
Yeah, so it's a mix, and it's honestly what we're really focused on right now is kind of taking things to the next level. But early on, it was a lot of like RFPs, a lot of like organic kind of referrals, a lot of dabbled in some Google AdWords. But yeah, I mean, definitely like being in the space and having kind of a unique angle to what we do, um, and just kind of really building a brand has been really really helpful. And Bubble and some of these low code tools like will refer us clients directly just because they know we're trusted. And I think we came on this like relatively speaking, like there was a lot more agencies. There was a lot of agencies like in the scene before we started, and I think pretty quickly we became like top. I would say at least top five, just revenue wise. Obviously product wise, I would obviously say we're number one, just because if you I think the big thing for us and why we kind of started it and why like I do enjoy the low code aspect of it a lot, but I noticed that one, I think the industry is, as you said, I think it's like heading in a way that will be really impactful. But I also think that there was at the time there was this stigma that like low code tools were pretty like slow and ugly and didn't feel good. And at the time that was pretty true. I mean, when we started, like even the biggest agencies were building like really crummy looking tools. So our approach was like super UI UX focused. Like, how can we build tools that don't look like they're built with no code and like you could go on it? And we did this for the Airbnb thing. You could go on it and you would not be able to tell unless you like inspected the code. So that was kind of our angle, and that's why we were able to charge a bit more premium of a rate, and we weren't like competing on price, and we've never competed on price. And I think over time we've just built a brand like that reputation as like that kind of company, and so more premium, companies that like just want to know that, like they pay maybe the extra kind of price, but the outcome of it and like the quality and like the team is going to just be 10x. So
That makes a lot of sense. So like you're coming very much at it from like a UI and UX experience of like, let's make this really seamless.
yep.
I know what you mean because I've definitely seen some pretty clunky no code platforms out there, which I can definitely see why you guys came into the
Yeah.
market.
Even if you compare like our site to like any other agencies, or even if you compare our site to any other like just company in general, like our site, we get a lot of like applause for it. I'm not being like a design agent. Like we do design, but we're not like a design agency per se. Like we're like a low code, development agency. So the fact that like our design looks how it is, I think speaks to kind of the work we put in. So
Yeah, yeah, I loved your guys' website. It was like super cool how when you swipe up, it like
the
flows up.
partnership. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that is
yeah.
epic.
Yeah.
Did you
We
build
put,
that in Webflow or was that in
yeah.
Bubble?
That was Webflow. I think Webflow is great for landing pages and stuff like that. Um, where Bubble is more of like a web app tool. So
Okay. Are you guys like? I've always been curious about this. Like, I know there's like a couple of other like no code tools kind of like come up and try to compete with Bubble because I feel like Bubble's kind of leading the web app space, but like there's like Softer and I think like there's Flutter and there's a few other kind of ones coming around. But have you like seen any other ones which are like notably like able to compete with Bubble, or do you still feel like Bubble's kind of like the one to go with?
yeah, I think we'll see like over the next couple of years like the market to start to diversify, and I think there are some like pretty strong competitors. I think that it's not necessarily like one is better than the other, but they'll just be better for different things. Bubble is trying to position themselves as like an all-in-one no-code platform, but there are times where you may want to like break things up. For example, if you want to build the front end on low code, but still use a kind of traditional backend stack, whether that's like Superbase or Xano is another tool, like which kind of answers to the question around like is this thing scalable, and that's like how you really take that to the next level, right? Where you still get the benefits of like this of no code from the front end, but then you just kind of connect it to like an AWS backend, just like any other.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys are using Xano to scale the back end of the database a lot, are
Yeah,
you? Okay.
yeah, we played around with it, and it's definitely interesting. I think that the fragmentation of these no code tools is really what's going to propel the industry.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, like, do you still think, like, I feel like there's all these like kind of like trends in tech that go through these like phases of being like really hyper and then they kind of die down, get saturated. Do you, what do you think of like the no code and bubble space at the moment? Do you still think it's like a great space to be in? Do you feel like it's dying off? Do you feel like it's like just getting started and now's like the time to start learning? Like what do you feel about the time of the no code and bubble space?
Yeah, I think we are still relatively pretty early. I think that AI is a interesting component that's obviously been kind of introduced to the world pretty recently that I think will like even propel the space more. 'Cause I think they kind of they play kind of similarly in the same sphere of like AI can only further propel like what low code's already doing, and you can also build with AI a lot faster now too. Because when you think about it, unless you're building your own model, which very few companies are, most companies are going to be using like OpenAI's GPT, and all that is just connecting a front end to an API. Um, and that's like basically what low code essentially is. Like low code is very plug and play. And so you kind of have that front end. And then, as I was saying before, you can kind of plug in any backend or any like third party layers, whether that's like Stripe for payments or like, Google Analytics or, all the other various like things for, whatever you want to do. Um, and ChatGPT is just another one of those like APIs. So it makes it super cool to like start building these like micro AI stuff as well, and like building those for businesses has been interesting.
Yeah. Have you guys been building many micro AIs? Has that been a pretty
Uh,
common
we
trend or?
we've done it. We've done a couple. I would say like we don't like particularly lead with that, just because we don't want to attract an audience that like is like on the AI hype wave necessarily. But I think when AI can be like applied smart and like with meaning, not just for the sake of using AI, it can be super powerful, and that's something we'll definitely explore more.
That's very cool. So I have one more question about Bubble before I'd love to go into a little bit of like life advice
Sure.
stuff and kind of like broader life ones. But yeah, I saw you guys were built Creator Now for Eric, which
Yeah,
is obviously a massive YouTuber. That's pretty
yeah.
cool. How did you guys get connected with him and what was that like building Creator Now?
Yeah, so we connected with their team through a friend of mine. They were Zach, who is was the CEO of Career Now and managed Iraq and Yes Theory. He was looking for some help on Career Now, which was like a bubble app at the time, super like bare bones. And so we basically got connected to them and basically operated like a rescue mission to kind of like get it to the point where they needed in order to like launch it. But then it pretty quickly was obvious that like the design of it that we didn't do, and just like the product up into the point where we stepped in was really like not great, like well done. And so we basically were like, well, listen, like let's like redesign this. Let's like kind of do our thing with it. And they were like super impressed by that. And the design I think held up pretty well even to like closely to what it is today, even though they actually just got acquired. So but yeah, we ended up working with them on like that like second phase, and then we ended up working with them like for like six, I don't even know, like maybe 6 to 12 months, somewhere in that range, to like just continue building as like their product team. And yeah, that was super cool. And it definitely led to a lot more cool opportunities, and hopefully will continue to lead to opportunities like in that creator space.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been a pretty cool experience, especially like watching it now as well, how it's like gone on to be acquired. Like that would
Yeah.
be cool to be like, whoa, this got acquired. So yeah, I'd love to ask you a couple of kind of like broader life questions as well. So like, what I guess as you reflect back on the last like 3-4 years, you've built this awesome business, which is you've been able to scale up. What life advice would you go back and tell your like 17-year-old self or your 16-year-old self if you could go back?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I think a lot of like kids that are trying to like make it, and I think it's actually, it's not just kids, pretty much everyone I think falls victim to this, is just like shiny object syndrome, and like trying to like chase too many things, like having doing this and then doing this, like, and hoping that one of them will work or all of them will work. But I think the reality is that there's something powerful by of just like banging your head on the table until that one thing that you're working on works. And I think it kind of takes a level of obsession and a level of like just like focus in order to actually make something work. I hear a lot of people, and and some people have like obviously done this. Like the extreme examples obviously being like Elon Musk, but like not many people are Elon Musk. Um, but I hear a lot of people be like, I can do this because this thing only takes like 2 hours, and so I have like another 4 hours in my day, so I'd spend another 3 hours here, and then I spend another like hour there. And while there is like some obviously like logic that like makes sense there, I think there's just something powerful about like one, the free time that you have is the time that you should be spending on like taking that extra step and like looking at how you can expand. Because like sure, you may only have like 2 hours of actual work to do, but there's probably an extra 2 to 4 hours you could be spending emailing people or connecting or whatever. So that's like one perspective. And the second thing is more just like mindset wise, of just like, if you want to be the best, you got to just like obsess, and you got to like think about it more than anybody, and you got to like learn at it more than anybody and work at it more than anybody, just like any you know NBA star. Like they're not going to be like trying different sports. Like, oh, that sounds kind of stupid, but it's kind of the
Yeah.
same analogy, right? I mean, like people laugh at that, but it's true. Like, how are you going to go build $1 million company when you have two other like side hustles? Like, you don't see that with any other successful person. So I think that's probably like the biggest thing. Sounds kind of cliche, but I think if you actually stick at something for a long enough time, assuming that you're seeing some traction, um, then you should probably just keep sticking on it.
Yeah, that's some actually like yeah, some really good advice. Like I think as you said, like with athletes and sports, like you don't see Messi playing cricket 2 days a week and then playing tennis 2 days. Like he's got obsession. I like that. I actually wanted to read out a quote I really liked you that you said on Brett's podcast. It was a little bit kind of like along the same wavelength as what you were saying, but I'll just read it out. So you said, you need to stop worrying about how to make money and just worry about how to give value to people and how to do something you actually like. Because even if you are doing something you really like and you're making little to no money, if you enjoy every waking moment, you'll find a way to make money out of it. And then you kind of went on to say how like no code and building software, this was like your thing that you found. But what advice would you give to someone, maybe they're like 16, 17, or they're 20 and they haven't found their like one thing that they like really love and they want to stick to yet? Like what advice would you give to them?
Well, I think everybody like has things in life that they like. I don't think any like I think the issue is that like 16, 17 year olds think, okay, like I like this one thing. Maybe it's like sports related, right? Um, and they're like, well, that like is separate to like what I'll enjoy doing in my career. Um, and so they just automatically assume that they aren't like good or valuable at anything in the market. Um, well, I think there's two things. One, it's like understand exactly what you like about that thing. So if you just like, let's just take the generic example of like liking sports. If you really like sports, well, sports is pretty broad. Like, what do you like about sports? Do you like the competitive nature? Do you like, the team nature? Do you like, I don't know, studying the sport? Like, what part of it are you more of a coach? Are you more of a player? Like, what do you like about playing? All these kind of things. Um, and then figure out like once you figure out that subset, figure out what you think you're uniquely good at. Like, that people would say, oh, he's like especially, or he or she is especially good at like this thing when it comes to like whatever that is. Um, and I think we live in an interesting world where you can kind of turn any passion into a business. So, if you really like sports, I mean, there's a really big, market for like going on Twitter and like creating a sports newsletter and like slowly building that up, right? And there's like a lot of other various examples I could give. That's maybe not the best, but I guess the first thing would be like, yeah, find that like really dial in what you enjoy doing, and then try to figure out a way to like turn that into something that can be monetized, because I think people don't really think that is possible. And if you can't do that, then to really dial in on like what exactly you like about that. If it's the team effort or it's the competitive nature, then go try to find other things that will give you that same kind of like feeling, I guess. And there's a lot of those things. So
That's awesome. I really like that advice. That's awesome. Well, I wanted to pivot into the final segment. It's called the rapid fire finishes. So it's just 5 rapid fire questions just to get to know you on a kind of different level. Um, so we'll kick that off. So yeah, what's your favorite book?
um, I like Shoe Dog's a good one. I like things that are stories. So Shoe Dog was kind of like the first like story entrepreneurship book I read. And I think it's just more enjoyable to read through stories.
If you could have dinner with any 3 people, dead or alive, from any time period, who would you have dinner with?
Hmm, interesting. I would say I've been really fascinated by like Mark Benioff recently. He's the founder and CEO of Salesforce. I think Salesforce, though he does get a lot of like slack for not being the nicest product to work with, it's just an extremely impressive company overall, and it's in a similar kind of domain that we play in. And so he seems like a great guy. I'd love to like pick his brain. I think the obvious answer, just like obviously, is just going to be like, Elon. I think despite what he may say, he's obviously a great entrepreneur, and would love to just chat with him. And then I think I'm really fascinated by like product and design, and just like vision. And again, pretty cliche answer, but probably like Steve Jobs. I mean, there's no one that really did it better than him. So be curious to see like how he would see the world going, and how he really predicted a lot of the stuff that obviously is now like pretty regularly used, from a smartphone to iPad to all these things. So pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, that would definitely be an awesome dinner table to sit at. I can only imagine the awesome conversations that would go on there.
Yeah.
And then the final question. This is a bit of a curveball, so feel free to think about it for a sec if you'd like. But if you could know the absolute truth to any one question, what question would you like to know the truth to?
Probably just like why we're like on this planet, like greater like mission, kind of like purpose, or if the answer is just like we're just supposed to be here and just have a good life. I'm curious.
Yeah, that would definitely be a good one to know the answer to. Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on, Jacob. I really appreciate you dropping all the wisdom about Bubble and just wisdom about life. And yeah, I think it'll be really useful for a lot of the listeners out there. A lot of them are pretty young, and you've done amazing stuff like very young. So I think it'll be amazing advice for them. But yeah, where could people go to follow your journey and follow Creme Digital's journey? Like, do you have Instagram, TikTok?
Yeah.
Where's the best place to follow you guys?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in like at all working with us, our website's creme.digital. And any like SMBs that are looking to like build internal tools, we'd love to chat with you guys. And so same with startups. If there is any like startups that are looking to kind of get started and have some money to deploy in like an MVP that looks good but can still scale and all that, definitely reach out as well. And then personally, like Twitter is a good place. Jacob Klug is my tag, and then I think TikTok is also Jacob.Klug. So if you search my name, should come up pretty much everything. So
Should come up. Awesome. I'll put the links to those down in the show notes.